the wheel. So this is the third of the four-element cards in the Major Arcana, in the Orbifold. So we've already explored two of those four-element majors, which were Manifestation and the Magician, and now we're at the Wheel. Being a four-element combination, it's going to share many aspects, many similarities with Manifestation and the Magician, but with some different nuances, some subtle differences. Maybe not so subtle in some cases. So where Manifestation was the non-personal, the general creation of everything, of things, of turning nothingness into somethingness, the explosion of the universe and its potential into being, and where the Magician was taking that potential or taking that explosion of things and the exposure to all of the various tools that we are all familiar with, and directing those tools in particular ways, using the tools at his disposal, the elements at his disposal, to direct change, to effect change in the world, or in his life, or taking those tools and doing something with them, depending on exactly the context. Now we have the wheel, and the wheel is now that change that it didn't necessarily need the Magician to effect the change, but in this kind of storyline that is the Major Arcana, the wheel is the point at which those changes really occur. Something shifts, something turns, and we turn from the first half of the minors toward the second half. It's not really half and half, although in the Orbifold, if you count the first two added majors, this is actually just past the halfway mark. The halfway mark is between the 9 and the 10. So here we have the four elements, and we're going from around the wheel, we're going from the top, from the voidness or nothingness or pure light, into air, into fire, into water, into earth, back to nothingness at the bottom of the wheel, and then back all the way up. So it goes from most subtle to most dense, least dense to least subtle, all the way around, turning and turning and turning, the wheel turns. And then within that external wheel, we have another wheel in the middle, or a layer in, that starts with that nothingness kind of at the sides and turns up. So there's a bit of the subtle element of air between earth and water. There's the transformative element of fire between earth and nothingness. There's the sensitive element, the intuitive element of water between nothingness and air, thought. And then the practical element, the beingness of earth between thought and action, between air and fire, and so on around the circle. So the elements are combining in interesting and creative ways, and oppositional elements are interfacing with elements that are closer to each other in ways that help facilitate that turning, that changing of the wheel. And there are oppositions and dependencies together. So again, in a more traditional depiction of the wheel, it's a circle, so that's easy. We're already always working with circles pretty much, and now the circles are arranged in a circle. And often there's a depiction in more traditional wheel cards of the four elements or the four directions, the four seasons, and the in-betweens between the seasons. So we get a sense of time with the wheel, turning of time, turning of the wheel, and with time comes change. Change is impossible without time. Time is impossible to determine without change. And so there's again kind of that relationship between the void and manifestation, where the void is timeless. Nothing changes in it because there's no time in it. It's beyond time. It's inclusive of all time, and being inclusive of all time, it lacks time. And yet manifestation has time in it, has change in it, and things manifest because of I don't think manifest is kind of an overused word, but things become things because of time. Things don't occur out of nothingness because of time. So that's evident in the wheel. But then we have smaller cycles than that grand universal cycle. We have smaller circles of change and time, and the way we circle the sun to create the seasons, the way the world turns around its axis to create the days, and the way the moon circles around the earth to create the months, or a perception of months. So we have this constant cycle of change and time, and to some degree transformation. The wheel is not always considered a major transformative card, but the wheel is one of the keys here anyway, to that transformation in having all the elements. So we can turn one element into a different one. We can turn a few elements into a different one element or combination of elements. And there again is all that potential, but it's not quite the same potential that manifestation had, because now all of this stuff is there. It's there, it's been there for a long time, and it's just in the middle of that cycle of change. Also, it's a little bit different than the magician, because we're not about to create change with things. We're in the middle of the process of that change. Of course, even at the stage of the magician is never really the beginning. The magician is in the process of that change as well. But the perception, the perspective of the magician is that he's beginning something. He's starting something with those tools. Here, we've not started. This is well along the way, and the change is not just occurring, but the change is inevitable. It's now unstoppable. So this is where we get descriptions of karma. We can't really talk about time and change without talking about karma. And in general, I tend to avoid talking about karma because I find it's very misunderstood. It's kind of a blanket term that we don't quite really get. We tend to apply our moralistic ideas and tendencies onto karma, or our personal wishes, our personal wants onto the idea of karma. And karma is well beyond that. Karma really doesn't care about your personal wants or wishes, or what you think is right or fair. Karma is way beyond that. It's the way that we are all intermixed and interdependent on each other, whether we want to be or not. It's that web of interconnectivity between us and each other, between us as a being and as a planet, and all kinds of other things. You know, our Earth is just a tiny little part of a huge process that is the solar system, and a huger process that is the galaxy, and on and on and on. And yet there's an interconnectedness. between the small aspects and the large aspects, and there's cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles. Um, so yeah, so karma doesn't really care about your morals. It's not concerned about what's right or wrong from that perspective. It is an equalizer in the sense that actions have results. Every action has a result. So I kind of like to use the analogy of a glass of water on a table, sitting on a table. We can't really determine the results of an action without considering the conditions prior to and following the action. Mostly prior to, but of course the action affects the conditions afterward as well. So the condition is that the glass of water is sitting on a table. Let's set up the condition a little bit further. Let's say that the table is 3 or 4 feet off the floor, a significant height off the floor. So it's not a coffee table, it's maybe a dinner table. And the floor is a hardwood floor. And I walk by the table and I accidentally knock the water off the table, the glass off the table. Well, so that's the action, is I knock the glass of water off the table. That action has a result. The result is the glass of water falls on the ground, and depending on the speed and force with which I knock the water will go very far or not so far, but of course the water will spill, and depending on the quality of the glass and how hard the hardwood floor is, the glass will break. If it's a concrete floor, let's say I'm in a kind of industrial restaurant and it's a concrete floor, then the glass is certainly going to break even if it's a fairly strong glass. So that's the result of the action. That sets up a new condition. Now we have broken glass all over the floor, broken glass all over a wet floor. And so that's a new condition. Now a next person walking by, it could be very dangerous for that person because they could, if they're wearing shoes or not, they could cut their feet on the glass, or they could slip on the water if the floor is slippery when wet. So that's a new condition. Or I change that condition by mopping up the water and cleaning up the broken glass. Now I've changed the condition, and somebody walking by on that same floor at possibly the same time, provided I've cleaned up before that was going to happen, they're not going to have that same result. The result is different. So action and result, action and result. Let's backtrack a little bit, back to the glass of water sitting on the table. Let's now say that the glass is not made of glass, it's made of plastic, so it's a plastic cup. I walk by, I knock the cup of water off the table with about the same amount of force. Now, that cup of water, the water's still going to spill everywhere. It might even spill further because the cup doesn't break. It maybe bounces and it throws water a little bit further. So now I still have a wet floor, but I don't have broken glass. Cool. So that's a different condition. A different set of conditions creates a different result from the same action. Then we backtrack again, back to the glass of water sitting on the table. Now let's say that the glass of water is frozen. Let's say it's still a plastic cup. So we've frozen the cup of water, and so now the water is ice, it's solid. The cup, though, it's a plastic cup and it's very, very cold now because it's been frozen. Let's say it's the kind of plastic that becomes fragile when it's cold. So now I walk by again, I knock the cup of water off the table, it falls on the floor. Now the cup shatters because it's cold plastic, it hits the hard surface, but the water doesn't spill everywhere. It's possible that the chunk of ice will still bounce and do other things, but I don't have a wet floor anymore. I have a broken cup, I have a broken vessel, but I don't have a wet floor. So different conditions, different results. then let's change the surface of the floors. Let's say it's, again, let's say it's like an industrial restaurant, and it's a floor that has rubber tiles on it. You know, those like half-inch rubber tiles that are nice to walk on, or cork tiles, something softer. Now, maybe the cup doesn't break, and the ice within the cup doesn't go anywhere because the cup just falls on the floor. Maybe it bounces, rolls around a little bit, but nothing too major. And so nothing has really happened much except, oh, I have to pick up the cup from the floor. So different conditions, different results. In our lives, there are many other conditions. I couldn't even list the number of conditions. It was the same idea as, again, with the manifestation card where I said, I talked about how if you're having an argument, there's all kinds of other things happening. It's kind of opening your awareness, opening your capacity to allow for many things happening at the same time. So during your argument, there may be birds singing, there may be people falling in love. That was my analogy. So there's all kinds of other things happening at the same time. Similar with the wheel card. There's so many, and with karma, there's so many things contributing to the conditions of the moment that any action performed in any moment will always have different results because the conditions are different. Now, certain conditions don't change so much, and certain conditions change a lot. So this is kind of a more generic, a more neutral understanding of karma and the wheel. And all elements combine at the wheel. All elements combine at karma. So thought, action, feeling, and being all combine into what are both the conditions of the wheel, what are the actions of the wheel, and what are the results of those actions. So, and it turns, and it's constant. You can never really stop time. You can't really stop karma from happening. It's always happening. You can step out of things, but that has a different effect because it's a different condition.